Hello, Acceleration Nation, and welcome to another Sick Career podcast. Today's podcast is a little unusual from some of the different ones. First off, I do not have any guests on this podcast. I'm just going to be talking about a very common, challenging question that clients and friends and family and people always ask me about. And the other uniquely different thing is I'm not recording this with my fancy podcast equipment, but instead I'm recording this in a Marriott Residence in Needham, Massachusetts, where I am up celebrating a family member's amazing bar mitzvah. But enough about me, enough about my travels. This is about a question I get all the time. So I always advise people not to reveal their compensation number. The reason why I tell people not to reveal how much compensation they are seeking in a job that they are pursuing is twofold. One, you could share a number that's too low, thereby underselling yourself, thereby reducing the amount of money and opportunity that you eventually get when that offer is extended to you. The second reason is if you guess a number too high, you are going to rule yourself out of that opportunity. The recruiter is going to use that as a knockout factor and say, adios, amigos. You want too much. I'm not wasting my time with you. I'm going to find some cheaper talent. So there are bad reasons for both of those from your perspective as a candidate. As a candidate, the more practice that you get during an interview, the better interviewer you will become. So if you say too high of a number and you get knocked out of that opportunity from a recruiter that is using that as an easy knockout factor, you do not have a chance to get more interview practice. And everybody needs more interview practice, even me, who's interviewed probably over 1,000 times myself. I've interviewed probably 2,000 people. I've probably done 1,000 interviews myself as a candidate. I can always improve. I can always practice. I can always get better with that. Secondly, if you offer too high, you are going to eliminate yourself from that interview process where you can meet more people at that organization and you can impress more people at that organization. And I have seen it occur. I've done it to candidates that have come through my pipeline where sometimes you realize that a candidate is more highly qualified than you initially expected, and you could either bump up their title or find another opportunity for them. So if you're pulling yourself out of that interview process because you said a number that rules you out because it's too high, you lost that opportunity. Third, the people that you meet during those interviews are all potential additional connections for you that you can build your network, you can build relationships, and whether you get that job or not, those people can be helpful for you. You can help them out down the road. I, for instance, interviewed at UKG. I interviewed there. The interview didn't go anywhere, but I made relationships with several people during that process. And one of those individuals wound up moving over to Datadog. And 17 months later, he reached out to me to inquire if I was interested in a role at Datadog. So those connections that you meet during that interview process and those reps will potentially increase the size of your network, will potentially increase your surface area of luck and make your career search, your job search, your future aspirations easier and not harder. Now, let's go back to the low ball situation where you throw out a number that is too low. When you throw out a number that's too low, you're essentially anchoring that company with a lower number that they can eventually make an offer to you. So say, for instance, you're interviewing at TikTok and they have maybe a range of $150,000 to $200,000 for a role for, let's say, a customer success manager. And you come to TikTok and say, you're looking for 125 to 150. Well, you know what offer TikTok's going to give you? They're going to give you something a whole lot closer to that 150 than that 200 mark because you lowballed yourself. So I've seen people lowball themselves way more often than I've seen people opt themselves out because of tossing in too high of a number. But regardless, if you are sharing a number that's too low or too high, the likelihood that you share a perfect number or a great number is very low because you have an asymmetry of information. The company that is looking to recruit you knows what they can offer, knows what other people on the team make, knows what market rates are because they get a lot more valuable data, a lot more aggregated data at the corporate level across different companies. So when you are looking at data through Glassdoor or through salary.com or comparably, that is all selection bias of people that choose to share that information. Companies, on the other hand, when I worked at Salesforce, when I worked at Facebook, when I worked at Google, they pay large consulting companies to aggregate anonymous data across a wide swath of companies and organizations so that the companies know what fair market value is. And they have that information. It is not selection bias. It is companies that share information with consulting companies in an anonymized way that share how much people are making based on location, based on roles, based on years of experience. And the companies have access to that data, which is a much richer data source and does not suffer from selection bias like you see on Glassdoor, on levels.fyi, comparably.io, and all those other sites. I want to share an anecdote here. I've shared this often in talks that I give, but my last role at Salesforce, I was a level 9 in New York City, leading director of programs and operations for customer success. I looked for comparison marks on levels.fyi, and I saw a range of different compensations that range from $90,000 on the low end to $428,000 on the high end. So first off, that's not all that valuable to have such a large deviation. If I were to rely on that information, I would have still lowballed myself because when I left my job at Salesforce back in 2021, I was earning $515,000. So if I thought that the top that I can earn was $428,000, I would have undersold myself. I would not have fought as hard as I did to continuously increase my compensation for the same exact work. I could have been doing the same job, making $428,000, maybe making $90,000. I think the $90,000 was just bad data there. But because I did not rely on that information, I instead just continued to fight for a higher price point, more money, more RSUs, more compensation that was able to pay for my kids' education, my mortgage, charity, and frankly, to save up enough money to start Kadima. So compensation is a tricky topic. You as a candidate have very little information and can short circuit yourself by saying information too soon. So because of that, here are some actionable tips to do. When an application asks you for what sort of compensation or salary you are seeking, when you need to do that early on, don't fill anything in. If that field is a required field, if it's marked by an asterisk or it doesn't let you go past it unless you fill information in there, try typing in the word negotiable or flexible. Some of those fields will allow you to type in words. Some of those fields will have data validation set up so that you actually need to put in actual numbers. So if you need to put in an actual number, just put in the number 1. And here's why I say that. If you have a good application, if you come from the right companies, if you have the right titles, if you have the right sort of career trajectory, if you look like the proper candidate for a role, a recruiter will dig further and have a conversation with you regardless of that number being entered as 1. If you put a number in there that's too low, you're going to lowball yourself, and 1 will indicate to the recruiter that you either misunderstood something or that number is not actually true. If you put the high number in, you're going to rule yourself out before you even get to speak to a recruiter. So do not put that number in the application field. So assuming you get past the application field and you get a call with a recruiter, the recruiter goes through all the applications. They see that you have the right background, the right companies, the right titles, and you look like an interesting candidate. That recruiter will talk to you. That recruiter will have a recruiter screen with you. In that recruiter screen, which are typically 30 minutes long, they will ask a series of things. They'll talk to you about the role, what the responsibilities of the role, who you're reporting to, blah, blah, blah. they will also try to identify knockout factors. Some of those knockout factors are, can you do some of those requirements that are required of that job? So they'll look through the job requirements and see what you are capable of doing. If you've had experience with that, you should always err on saying yes, or I've kind of done some of that work. You try not to say no there unless honestly you've never done anything in that vein. Then if the recruiter asks you, oh, I see in your application here, you put the number 1 here. That doesn't seem accurate. What sort of compensation you're seeking? You say to them, you know what, I didn't put the number in there because honestly, I'm just want to get paid fairly and equitably for the scope and impact of the role. That will shut them up most of the time. If the recruiter goes back to you and says, well, we kind of need a number here, your response is, you know what, I'm really excited to work at Johnson & Johnson. Compensation's not going to get in the way of us coming to an agreement. That will shut up the recruiter most of the time and say, okay, well, we can talk about that later down the road. But if for some odd reason that recruiter comes back to you and asks a third time, we really need to know a number here, your response is, you know, I'm not really familiar with how you compensate people here at Stripe. Can you share a little bit more about your compensation philosophy and how you pay people? Then the recruiter will likely talk and share some information, jot down notes diligently, and your response should be, oh, interesting. That's very different than how I get paid currently at American Express. Can I get back to you after I think about this a little bit further? And the recruiter will say yes. And 9 times out of 10, actually every time I've ever known a client to use this tactic, they have never needed to go back to their recruiter and follow up and tell them what sort of compensation they were seeking. So you have effectively deflected, deferred, and declined to talk about compensation. And you will move on, if you're a qualified candidate, to the hiring manager screen. Then if you do well at the hiring manager screen, you will get to the loops. If you do well at the loops, you will get an offer. And that offer will come with a number. And whatever that number is, that is only the starting point, and you can only go up from there. So I'm going to finish up this episode now, but I want to share with people how important compensation is. It is something that the recruiting company, the company that's hiring you, has an asymmetry of information, and they use that in their favor to find candidates that fit their budget and their targets, but it is not looking out for your best interest. Do not share that information. Deflect, defer, decline to talk about compensation, and own your career. So that wraps up this episode. Let me know what you think of this. Rate and review this podcast. Shoot me an email. You can always reach me at alan@academicacareers.com. You can also always reach me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. And if I can ever help you to own your career, there's 2 primary ways that we do that. One way is we offer a digital course product. You can learn all the strategies, the worksheets, the scripts that will get you more interviews, more offers, and more money. If you're someone that likes a higher touch situation, wants direct access to me, unlimited access to me until you get a job, we do offer one-on-one job acquisition coaching. So both of these can be found on our website, or if you're having trouble finding them, come join one of our upcoming job acquisition workshops. These workshops are well attended. They are free. I will share with you in depth about how job acquisition really works. It will be an interactive workshop. You will be filling out an interactive worksheet, which will help to diagnose some of your challenges and help you to understand where your opportunities are to get more interviews, to get more offers, and to make more money. So with that, have a great day, and I appreciate all your support. Thank you.
That wraps up another remarkable episode of the Sick Career Podcast with Alan Stein. Check out past episodes and other resources on the website. That's sickpodcast.com, and it's SYCK. Alan, tell the audience about the newsletter they can sign up for.
The newsletter rocks. Check out the accelerator, XLR8R. You will get great tips about your career. You'll get honest insights. You'll get the occasional pet picture, and you will learn how to take proactive control and take charge of your career.
Very good. Very good. That's sickpodcast.com, SYCK. For your host, Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. You are going to love the next one.